Good morning. This is Senator Dave Marsden, Chairman of the Subcommittee on Economic Development and Natural Resources. Welcome. Do we need to take roll?
I can go ahead and do that, Mr. Chairman. This is Charles. Senator Barker. Senator Hanger. Senator Howell. Senator Ruff.
Here.
Senator Saslaw.
Here.
Senator Marsden.
Here. All right. We are ready to go. I think Senator Howell is downstairs. There she is. And Senator Howell is here. And, first up today, we have the Honorable Matt Strickler, Secretary of Natural Resources, who is going to brief us on what is going on in his world. And Matt, are you there?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And Jason, do you need to do anything preliminary to Matt kicking it off?
Mr. Chairman, I think Secretary Strickler is going to say some opening remarks and give you sort of a general overview of the whole Secretariat. Then Director Christman has a short slide presentation that goes into the introduced actions at Department of Conservation and Recreation, because that is the bulk of the spending in the introduced budget is located.
Thank you, Jason. So, Secretary Strickler, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chairman Marsden, members of the committee. It's good to be here with you this morning, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm going to be very brief because while there are a number of spending initiatives in the natural resources section of the budget, most of them are items that were reallotted from what was unallotted earlier in the year. So they're things with which you're familiar, particularly with respect to water quality, land conservation, and kind of revitalization of the Department of Environmental Quality. As Jason mentioned, there are a significant number of new initiatives in the Department of Conservation and Recreation's budget. So Clyde Christman's going to give the bulk of our presentation, but I'll be here to answer any questions that folks have. And again, appreciate the time. Clyde, I'll turn it over to you.
Welcome, Clyde.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and Jason's going to tee my slide presentation up, and I'm going to try to go through this fairly efficiently. While we're on the title slide, I always like to take the opportunity to remind the members of this important committee of all the things that the Department of Conservation and Recreation is responsible for. As you know, we operate our award-winning state parks. Our 40th state park is imminently getting ready to open as soon as maybe COVID settles down a little bit. And of course, you all are very familiar with our Soil and Water Conservation Division that works with the 47 Soil and Water Conservation Districts and providing the agricultural cost share funding. Our Outdoor Recreation Planning Division that, amongst other things, administers what is a little over $6 million in federal land and water conservation funds, also does the Virginia Outdoors Plan, and operates our design and construction unit for our state parks. Our Natural Heritage Program, an internationally award-winning program, we operate over now 65 natural area preserves and also do a lot of work identifying rare and endangered plant species and also working on invasive species. Our Dam Safety and Floodplain Management Program, our Dam Safety Division administers or regulates over 2,000 dams in the Commonwealth. And then our Floodplain Management Division, amongst other things, is responsible for working with local governments and administering the National Flood Insurance Program, and also a lot of work coming up ahead of us in terms of funding for floodplain management. And then lastly, our Land Conservation Division that not only administers the land preservation tax credit for those credits over $1 million, in addition to the funding that you provide for the Land Conservation Foundation. Jason, if you move on to my next slide, quickly giving you an overview of our budget. In fiscal year 21, our general fund appropriation is about $130.5 million. For FY22, about $118.6. The main difference between those two funds is the $15 million you provided for dam safety that's in the first year, in addition to the fact that we had a higher amount of funding for water quality, the Water Quality Improvement Fund in the first year. And then as you see, we have right around $58 million in non-general funds. A good portion of that is our state parks revenue, which I'll talk about in more detail momentarily. We currently have an authorized MEL of about 482 FTE, of which 420 of those are filled right now. We have about 62 vacancies, some in recruitment, some that we're pausing on as we monitor the budget situation. And then we're also very dependent on our wage staff. We have 655 currently filled. And during the season, that number goes up to a little over 1,600 for our seasonal, particularly state parks, but also some in natural heritage. Mr. Chairman, we administer a little over 37.6 million in federal grants from a variety of sources, including the National Park Service, the Federal Highway Administration, EPA grants that pass through DEQ. I mentioned FEMA and the floodplain, and also the Fish and Wildlife Service. Jason, if you'll move on to the next slide, please. This year, the Water Quality Improvement Fund deposit totaled 30.3 million. Just to refresh your memories, the Water Quality Improvement Fund consists of 10% of any general fund revenue above the official forecast. As you know, this year that was zero because we did not meet the official forecast. However, because the governor instituted discretionary spending freezes and hiring freezes, the other portion of the Water Quality Improvement Fund is unobligated agency balances. And that was the majority. This is an unusual year. Usually that's a relatively small amount of the funding. This year, that was the majority of the funding that's provided for the Water Quality Improvement Fund. Real quickly, just running through some of the what we call the carve-outs that are in the Appropriation Act that come off the top of this. We have $500,000 to match federal funding for the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, $500,000 for the VCAP program, which is administered by the Soil and Water Districts. There's $1 million for a variety of non-point projects, such as our resource management plan, our poultry litter transport plan, as well as nutrient management plans. A new initiative, the Small Farm Outreach Program. This is a partnership with Virginia State University that we will be working with to target smaller farmers, and particularly minority farmers who often don't get to participate in the cost share program. So a way of reaching out to more diverse producers and also the smaller producers. A new initiative to the Department of Forestry is the Virginia Trees for Clean Water project, which there's $500,000 going to the Department of Forestry to help plant trees and riparian buffers. And I'll note it's not on the slide here, but also there's a continuation of $250,000 to the Department of Forestry to support their silvicultural practices. And then there's a new initiative for clean water financing and assistance program over at DEQ. This program is a pay for documented performance pilot program, and it's going to focus on strategies that are innovative nutrient reduction strategies, such as bioreactors in the valley. I believe Mr. Paler's with us if you need any more information on that. And then the Department of Health, there's a $100,000 proposed for the Department of Health to try to map out some of the septic systems that are around the state that are failing. We know there's a lot of septic systems that are beyond their life expectancy. And so the Department of Health really needs to help get the handle on that. And it's an important part. All of these initiatives are an important part of our Chesapeake Bay goals, as well as outside the Chesapeake Bay. And then there's $250,000 as a continuation of funding to support our conservation suite, which basically gathers all the data from all of the 47 soil and water districts so that we can get credit with the EPA for our Chesapeake Bay model. So about $4.3 million that comes off the top. Jason, if you'll move on to the next slide, please. So what that leaves then is a transfer to the Natural Resources Commitment Fund that is dedicated for agricultural best management practices. And what you see is $60 million from the WQIF. In addition, and so that breaks down into a split of 18.2 million within the Bay watershed and 7.8 million outside of the Bay. And then in addition, the governor's budget proposes a supplemental deposit for ag BMPs of $9 million. And that's broken out similarly with 6.3 in the Bay and 2.7 outside the Bay. Important part of this amendment also is that it restores the 4.55 million that y'all had approved last year at this time for base technical assistance funding for the soil and water districts. Very important initiative that many of us have been working together on towards this goal. So that funding was unallotted. It has now been restored in the introduced budget. And I'll mention quickly, there's also the $10 million appropriation of the continuation of the funding that comes from the recordation tax that's added as well for our agricultural best management practices. Jason, next slide, please. As Secretary Strickler mentioned, a lot of what you see is restoring things that were in the budget that were previously unallotted. Last year, you had approved us to hire a lead dam safety engineer. I mentioned that we regulate over 2,000 dams. We have 5 engineers to cover the entire state of over 2,000 dams. This would provide us a lead engineer to be able to supervise the activities and be able to better respond in emergency situations, and also 2 additional floodplain planners to help us with all of the work ahead of us as we're dealing with coastal flooding and enhanced coastal flooding, as well as all the other issues related to floodplain, and making sure that our local governments maintain compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program so that their citizens can maintain flood insurance. Again, these were unallotted during the veto session and they're restored. And just mentioning that there is the $15 million that was restored during the special session in the fall for the district dams. Jason, next slide, please. A very important addition in the governor's budget is a proposal for a little over $1 million in addition for our natural heritage program. As I mentioned, we currently operate 65 natural area preserves. During COVID, both our natural areas as well as our state parks saw huge increases in visitation. We've never experienced this level of public access in our natural areas. This has been something that this committee has been particularly interested in, is providing additional access to these areas while maintaining the balance of the biodiversity conservation. And in order to keep up with the demand, we really appreciate this inclusion in the governor's budget and appreciate your consideration of that. State park operations, this $556,000 basically to support our maintenance, supplies, additional wage support. This was, again, approved by you last year, and then it got unallotted when we got in the budget crisis. So that's back before you for your consideration again. Jason, moving along to the next slide, 2 new initiatives that I want to bring your attention to. Some of you may have seen the report in the Washington Post about Project Harmony. Former Columbian Harmony Cemetery in Washington, D.C. was basically literally bulldozed. It was an African-American cemetery. It was bulldozed in 1960 to make way for where the Rhode Island Metro Station now is. And the bodies were reinterred in a cemetery over in Prince George County, Maryland. Somehow the tombstones ended up being treated as riprap, spread along the shoreline next to Caledon State Park in King George County. This funding will provide us the opportunity to recover. We've recovered about 55 of the tombstones. The goal is to recover as many of the tombstones as we can and deliver them to the cemetery in Maryland, which has agreed to accept them, where the bodies are currently buried in unmarked graves. And then the remainder of the material, they bulldozed the entire cemetery. So it's the curbs, gutters, bricks from the chapel and everything that would be used to help with shoreline erosion and creating a Harmony Living shoreline memorial that will protect water quality, will improve habitat, and help to meet some of our goals. And also this property has a deed of dedication of the Chotank Creek Natural Area Preserve. And then there's $3.5 million proposed for Chickahominy tribal land restoration, a very important piece of property known as Mamanahunt that Captain John Smith documented that there were, quote, 200 souls living on this peninsula. And this is for the tribe to be able to restore that. I would note that this funding would go through the normal procedures that we require for the Virginia Land Conservation Fund acquisitions, such as requiring appraisals, title searches, etc. Jason, then if you'll move on to the next slide. There is one other important amendment. Back in March of last year, we made the difficult decision to have to furlough about 525 of our wage staff. Unfortunately, that came with a cost because we now have to pay unemployment insurance expenses, and also some of the other expenses that we saw directly related to COVID. And so this is a relatively small addition to help us address those issues. Jason, moving on to the next slide. In the capital budget, Jason asked me to cover just a couple things that are in the capital budget. In item C40 is the list that the General Assembly has established for us to be able to focus on in-holdings and contiguous properties to some of our existing parks. Before you is additions to that list of state parks of Highbridge Trail, Grayson Highlands, and Stanton River. And then there's some non-general funds that are added, $500,000 in 21 and $800,000 in 22. The source of those funds is from the Virginia Land Conservation Fund. I didn't mention it because it's not new, but you might recall that the General Assembly did restore $10 million in funding for the Virginia Land Conservation Fund during the special session last fall. And then also for natural area preserves, there's the addition of Dendron Swamp, Magathy Bay, and Lyndhurst Ponds. These natural area acquisitions are supported by a variety of federal funds, other grants, and for example, the case of Lyndhurst Ponds, it was some of the DuPont mitigation funds that will be supporting those acquisitions. Jason, moving right along. Jason always asked for us to give you sort of our performance report and how our state park revenues were. So I'm going to quickly show you some comparisons from FY 18, 19, and 20. So interestingly, if you notice, our camping and cabin revenue went down significantly in FY 20. Real simple reason, we had to shut down all of our campgrounds and all of our cabins, or all of our overnight rental facilities were shut down starting in March. Our campgrounds were able to reopen Memorial Day. Our cabins with some operational changes opened in June when the governor lifted some of the restrictions, but obviously there was some significant reduction to our revenue. However, if you look at the parking revenue, which is basically our admissions revenue, this is documentation of what I told you earlier, in that we have seen in amazing levels of visitation. Back in March and April, we were seeing on weekdays the level of visitation that we would expect on a July 4th weekend. And then so you see that actually boosted our revenue substantially in the parking fees and admission fees. And that sort of carried us through the year. So overall, we were at one point in time projecting a $6 million revenue hit. And as you can see, at the end of the day, it ended up being only about $2 million. A lot of that we had to deal with the the layoffs that I mentioned earlier. And Jason, someone just sent me a text that said that the PowerPoint's not streaming to the public. I don't know if that's unexpected or not, but someone just sent me a note saying they can't see the slides. So moving along, Mr. Chairman, the next three slides I'm going to go through rather quickly, but Jason always asked me to show you sort of the performance of our state parks. And so what you see here in the first column is the attendance per park, and that is for calendar year 20. And then a comparison of the revenue versus general fund support that leads to operating expenses. So just for example, Bell Island, we had about 44,000 people attend that park, which generated about over $226,000 in revenue. However, thanks to your general fund support, that we meet the total budget of that park, operating budget's about $644,000. As you see, every park is different. So let me draw your attention to, for example, First Landing. Our attendance at First Landing, over 860,000 people, which produced almost $2.6 million in revenue. And so what you see is that our operating budget for that park is only 1.6, which means that park is generating revenue that helps to reduce the need in general fund support for other parks. It basically goes to the good of the family. Similarly, you see results for Kiptapeak, where we had over 210,000 visitors, generate almost 1.2 million in revenue, and that produced a net to the good of the family of about 179,000. Jason, if you'll go to the next slide, again, just sort of highlighting some of the different parks so that you can see how this breaks out. Doubt that being another good example, we had an attendance there of 112,000. generated about 1.2 million in revenue. Our operating budget there is about 1.7. So again, the general fund supported about 560,000. Pocahontas, one of our flagships, over 782,000 visitors, generating 1.7 million in revenue. So with a 1.5 million operating budget, again, a couple $100,000 to the good of the family. And Jason, if you'll go to the next slide, I'll draw your attention to the summary at the bottom of this, which basically totals it. So one of the things we've done is we've gotten a lot better in terms of our attendance numbers, where we're giving you better data. Virginia Tech has been very helpful. So our attendance this year, over 7.8 million individuals. When you add up all the revenue, it's slightly more than the number that I told you on the slide of the summary slide, about 23 million. That accounts for some administrative anomalies, things like refunds where we had to cancel reservations. So where the park had generated revenue, but that at the end of the day, our bottom line didn't. But if you see the total general fund support, about 10.5 million. I would note, Mr. Chairman, that this is when we break this down per park. This does not include our central office staff. This does not include things like IT, those kinds of expenses. The total general fund support for state parks is about 19 million, but this is the part that's attributed per park that we can then compare to the revenue that comes in. So, Mr. Chairman, I apologize for rolling through that so quick, but I know you have a lot on your docket this morning, and I'm happy to take any questions, or if you'd like to move on. Here's my contact information. I think most all the senators have my cell phone and know how to reach me. So certainly Jason and Charles too. So if you have any follow-up questions, be happy to address those. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clyde, very much. That was a great presentation. Just a couple of quick questions for me. How many of those, when we talked about sewage systems, how many of those alternative systems do you think have been put in place in Virginia? Do you have any idea on that?
Senator Marson, I have no idea, and I think that's part of this initiative is to get a better handle on the number of these septic systems and looking at community-based solutions. But I know we did have some data in the WIP, and so I'll be happy to get with the team and get back to you with a more specific answer on that.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. And how many dams do you feel at this point in time are under, I don't know what the term to use, risk, duress? What of those 2,000 dams, where do you think we are with those that are problematic?
Again, I can give you the specific breakdown on the numbers. I'll be happy to get that information to staff to provide to you, but just sort of summarizing, I will tell you that probably of the 2,000, only about a third of them actually have regular operating certificates. There's probably another third that have a variety of deficiencies, and then there probably is well over a third remaining that have significant deficiencies. As you know, the dam safety program is under the requirements for the most part that the owner of the dam is responsible for both the engineering assessments as well as corrective actions. And in many cases, dams are owned by homeowners associations, you name it, that don't have resources to work with them. So, and just to put it in perspective, Mr. Chairman, on the district-owned dams, I believe there's a little over 100 of them, and I think about 60 of them fell into the high hazard class. The $15 million that you provided, we're looking to try to leverage that with federal funding to take it as far as we can. But I will tell you, it's not unusual that one dam can cost between $3 and $5 million to bring up to current standards, depending on the size of the dam. But again, I will get you a summary report from our dam safety program, Mr. Chairman, that gives you the exact numbers.
Thank you very much.
Probably not good when I guess off the top of my head.
Great. Thank you very much, Clyde. Questions from the subcommittee? Senator Hanger? No. Everything? Anyone? Clyde, thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation, and we'll be in touch. Yeah, get me that stuff, and I appreciate it. Next up, Jason, I believe we have Eric Johnson, Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development, who's going to give us an overview of the governor's budget proposals for the Department of Housing and Community Development. Eric, are you there?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me. Thank you for the committee. Look forward to giving this presentation. Charles, if you can go ahead and advance to the overview slide. So while Charles is just two forward, Charles, thank you so much. I want to thank your staff for their constant work with us throughout the pandemic, and really want to thank the General Assembly, this committee, the governor for their leadership in working on both eviction prevention, affordable housing, broadband, and our Main Street recovery, both in the pandemic response, but also in the long-term recovery efforts, the long-term solutions to work to address those challenges. There were some historic investments made during the special session in those areas, and the governor's introduced budget, and want to recognize Secretary Ball and the governor for their leadership, add some funding to continue in many of those areas, the investments you all made in the special session. So one more slide, Charles. So I'm going to first talk about the Housing Trust Fund, work to explain the new emergency rental assistance coming from the federal government and the stimulus package that passed in December, talk about the eviction prevention diversion pilot, Main Street recovery, and broadband. And again, with all these buckets of funding, there is both a component that is pandemic emergency response, and then also a recovery component in these critical areas to the Commonwealth. Next slide. You all, the General Assembly and the governor, made a historic investment to put the Virginia Housing Trust Fund at $55 million during the special session. And the governor's introduced budget includes an additional 15.7 in this current fiscal year in the caboose budget to put the trust fund at 70.7 million. And the reason for that is that in addition to the long-term investments of construction loans to incentivize the construction of affordable housing and homeless reduction grants, the Commonwealth stood up a rent and mortgage relief program back in June of 2020. And there was a need to have bridge funding to continue that program until the additional federal assistance as it was being debated and until it arrived. Next slide, Charles. So this slide has a lot on it, but I think it's one of the key slides I want to make sure to update the committee on. I mentioned that the Commonwealth used $62 million in federal CARES CRF funds to begin the rent and mortgage relief program. Those funds have been fully obligated. We had to transition over to utilize the Housing Trust Fund to continue that assistance to tenants and landlords during the pandemic. If you look at the chart, in essence, the competitive loan pool right now has 16.6 million allotted. We have over 18.9 million in requests right now for that, just the fall round. So the demand on the construction loan side is very, very large. We're reserving that 40 million for the rent and mortgage relief program. We expect to be able to transition over to the new federal emergency rental assistance this week, but we're still working on ensuring all that funds comes into the Commonwealth and that we can transition to the new rules of the emergency rental assistance program. I think the key point to note is that we will at least have 25 million already spent with the Housing Trust Fund and the eligibility we have with the current program. We are waiting and have made it a priority to ask the U.S. Treasury Department to let us know if we can supplant and pay back those Housing Trust Fund dollars that we've used, and also trying to make sure that the eligibility be used for the current rules of our state program will match and make sure those $25 million at least will be eligible. So we will be reporting back to the committee as soon as we can on those determinations from U.S. Treasury. But the bottom line is, at a minimum as of today, 25 million needs to be reserved for what we've already obligated and spent on the rent and mortgage relief program, and to bridge over to that new money. If the The trust fund, though, as you all have made those investments for the long term in terms of creating more affordable housing, ensuring we work to functionally end homelessness, every dollar that we have to go up further with the rent and mortgage assistance on the short-term relief, it pulls away from that longer-term loan and grant pool. Next slide. So just a quick snapshot of the data on the rent and mortgage relief program. We were the first state, one of a handful of states that stood up a statewide rent and mortgage assistance program in the pandemic. The Commonwealth has served over 21,000 households since inception, and you can see some more of the data on the demographics. We're focused on outreach to Black and Brown communities, to communities hardest hit by the pandemic and hardest hit on evictions pre-pandemic. Next slide. This gives you a snapshot of the Housing Trust Fund demand from last fiscal year. And so you can see that 27.7 million requested. With the funding from last fiscal year, we were able to award 11.2 million in the competitive loan. So you can see a really strong and healthy demand. And you can see the homeless reduction grant demand as well. This year alone, we have a fall and spring round for the construction loans. We already are at 18.9 million for the fall round. We're reviewing those and waiting on making those award determinations until we figure out how much of the rent and mortgage assistance is going to be able to be supplanted with the new federal funds, because we're already at 18 million in request and 16 million in competitive loan funds available with the trust fund this year, given the rate of the rent and mortgage relief, short-term relief expenses. Next slide. This has a lot here, but I really wanted the committee to have a good summary of the new federal emergency rental assistance. It's really unprecedented in terms of the CDC working first on that federal eviction moratorium. President Biden has extended that eviction moratorium at the federal level till the end of March, and has proposed extending it even further into September. And the Commonwealth's policy has really been focused on ensuring that tenants and landlords be made whole with the rent and mortgage relief program assistance, and that evictions not be possible until that be done. The stimulus package that passed December 27th of 2020 included $25 billion nationwide in emergency rental assistance. The Commonwealth's allocation is $569.6 million. And we are, again, a lot of states have been asking us about our statewide approach, because in other states, sometimes it's been just the localities implementing rent assistance. The Department of Housing and Community Development, along with our sister agency, the Virginia Housing Development Authority, Virginia Housing, have really worked to have both the landlord portal on the Virginia Housing side, where a landlord, wherever you are in the Commonwealth, can get on their portal and work to sign up and get the documentation required from tenants experiencing economic hardship to help pay those short-term rent needs as households recover from from recovery to getting new jobs or being reemployed with their former employer. DHCD is also managing a resource support center, RMRP resource center, where we have both an online portal and a call line for those without broadband access, where we are administering this statewide currently with the trust fund dollars. We're going to be transitioning over to this statewide use of the emergency rental assistance, which it's important to note does not include eligibility for mortgage assistance. It's just for rental and utility assistance. And we will be administering that program statewide, except in Chesterfield and Fairfax. Those localities did choose to administer the programs themselves. Those localities over 200,000 population had that option from the U.S. Treasury, and we are coordinating closely with them to make sure our rollout is clear as to where households should turn if they need assistance. We are really thankful for Virginia Housing and the landlord approach, and really trying to push landlords to work through that portal, because it expands our outreach and capacity exponentially for the landlords to be a part of the team getting households signed up. Bottom line is that the new funds fit very well with our current program and on the eligibility. The main thing that we are working through is with the changeover in administration, getting some firm guidance from U.S. Treasury on determining income, determining eligibility, and we're working through our partner states to really ensure there's as much flexibility for the Commonwealth as possible to serve as many residents as possible. These funds have to be spent, obligated 65% by September and fully spent by the end of this year. So it's an unprecedented amount of money that needs to get out the door to eligible households. But we've scaled up rapidly on both landlord and tenant approaches to do so. Next slide. So the governor's budget does also continue the Virginia eviction reduction pilot in the second year of the biennium. And the key about this small pilot is it's focused on those localities with the highest eviction rates pre-pandemic. This is one of the key tools we see as a need, and the General Assembly saw as a need to fund to get at the long-term reduction of evictions, regardless of the pandemic impacts that have affected so many Virginians. This program is looking at the data, the systems approach in localities and regions to ensure we create a system to reduce evictions, much like we have a system in the Commonwealth that has been successful at reducing the rate of homelessness by coordinated systems with the courts, with the data, with social services. And so this is the continuation of that program in the second year. It's critical long-term policy solution to get at that. Next slide. There's also investment in the Virginia Main Street program. The program is currently funded at $500,000 annually, and the proposal is to take that to $3.5 million, so an increase of $3 million, to really bolster hyper-local nonprofit and local government efforts to support our Main Street businesses, both in a community business launch grant program we currently operate, and in terms of some downtown grants, both in urban, suburban, and rural areas to help with the recovery on our main streets. Next slide. This provides some information about the uses. I'll go to the next slide to get more granular on where the $3 million will go. It's $3 million in terms of $1 million in grants for Virginia Main Street recovery grants to assist both entrepreneurial training and support, moving to e-commerce, helping your business districts really get at the needs to change and pivot to the new economic realities and new opportunities. The community business launch is another $1 million increase to that grant program, which provides, think of it as Shark Tank with real estate connected to it in terms of trying to get businesses in the door with the training, the pitches, the needs for capital, and also into the real estate that is available that may have turned over as businesses have struggled during the pandemic. This really builds on the strength of the Rebuild Virginia grants with the governor, secretary led, and SBSD, and helps provide some more targeted resources to create new revenue streams for businesses that are seeking that, or new businesses that have an opportunity in our new economic landscape. And the last component is grants, our technical assistance for those corridors statewide in terms of new e-commerce marketing and promotions for those Main Street corridors. Next slide. We thank this committee for their historic investments in the General Assembly and Governor in the last mile broadband program of the Commonwealth, the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative. The program was funded at that $49.725 in the special session, and the governor's budget increases the base in the second year of the biennium to maintain it at that $49.725. And I know I've spoke to this committee multiple times on this program, and you all helped create and incubate it. Next slide. I just want to make sure you see the demand where we funded currently over the first 25 million. And keeping in perspective, this program started with 1 million, went to 2 million, really saw success. That 19 million was our last round and last fiscal year. So the results so far are based on that 25 million initial investments over several years. And you can see where we funded, the number of connections at that 53,000. I think it's important to pause and think about how critical your investments were for those households who did not have access to broadband, who during the pandemic have because of your investments, and had access to telehealth, distance learning, to their jobs. Next slide. But the demand continues to increase. And one of the most exciting things is we're starting to see, with this larger amount of funding, those types of applications that are really seeking to get at universal broadband access across a whole locality and across even planning district commissions and regions. So we have 100 million in requests. We have the 49.725 right now, and we have over 105 million requested, which will leverage an additional 105 million in match funds for those projects. So that's those are under review right now. We've been delayed slightly in announcing those projects because of some impacts of new federal investments for the FCC through the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. As our program, we really seek to invest where there aren't other federal investments that are going to get at that universal access. So those are under review, and we should be able to announce in the coming weeks at least a first round of announcements. Next slide. And then just also with your and the governor's efforts on the CARES Act, we were able to, as a Commonwealth, serve another 30,000 Virginians with CARES Act fast access broadband efforts, and the localities and private partners moved really quickly to deploy those funds in the latter part of last calendar year. So I know I went through that very quickly, but Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you for your investments in these critical areas and for your leadership. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Eric. That was very informative. We appreciate it. Could you do something for me real quick, is to walk through a qualified person who is qualified for rent relief, what they do, how long they're covered for, at least at this point, and how long you project that they're going to need that help based on current circumstances. But, just kind of a on-the-ground walkthrough of what it's like for a Virginia citizen to go through this.
Mr. Chair, the process would be one program, two doors, and really anyone who has had a COVID-19 economic hardship, whether it be a loss of income, having to stay at home and care for sick family members. We really try to screen households in, would be eligible to come and apply and look at whether they're at 80% or less of the area median income for their locality. So that's, it factors in the different costs of living in different parts of the Commonwealth. And if they're in a unit, rental unit or a home that is under 150% of the fair market rent. So trying to, if they're in a unit that's at that level, they would qualify based on showing that economic hardship, showing the income determination and the cost of their unit. There's two ways they can come through the program. Landlords, it's a program that requires financial information, both a W-9 from the landlord and the lease, and then also income and COVID economic hardship from the tenant. And so the landlords are working, many of them, and appreciate their associations to actually sign up their tenants who are having trouble and having that dip in income because of the pandemic related reasons. And then for those landlords who are not a part of that program, tenants are actually able to call, go on our website to look at the eligibility. There's also 211. We've been the social service line for the Commonwealth, who are able to then be directed to our resource center, where folks can work on an application, do the chat feature. If they're having trouble, they can talk to a customer service rep. And we have bilingual accessibility and also language service. be candid with you, the volume and increase in demand on this program has really expanded. So the call volumes are high. When we're working to continue to expand our capacity, the landlord approach really helps us streamline and brings the landlords into helping collect the information needed. But a household would, that's in general how it would work. We're working through with the new program. It will only be for rental assistance given the federal rules, but in general will be the same income eligibility. So it's your income as you present, not your income necessarily over the past 3 months. The new federal rules, it looks like we may have to look at the last 2 months, but we're working through their eligibility determinations. I do want to thank, I do have our Chief Deputy Pam Kessner, who's led that effort with her team and Virginia Housing, and we'd happy to follow up with more.
Thank you very much, Eric. Other questions from the subcommittee? Senator Ruff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric, going back to the broadband, obviously you have more requests than you have money to do it, but have you analyzed those communities that have not been putting in applications? I noticed that from Charlottesville down through Charlotte County, you're not seeing any activity at all. Is that because they're not applying or they're not doing a good job of making applications? And is there anything that should or could be done to assist that process?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ruff, thank you for that question. That is an important work that we believe needs to be done as well. And with the General Assembly working to move the CIT portions of the broadband effort under planning under one house with DHCD, so the funding and the planning are together. Dr. Tamara Holmes, our broadband office director, is on, and we have been working and have identified those communities and counties and towns cities who don't have a broadband plan now. We know that many have a universal broadband plan and really know how to get there. And we do have some communities that are not as far along in that process. And that's why that team has GIS experts and telecom experts now that we've built that out as of after July 1st of last year. And they're working to help those communities be ready to apply. And so, yes, in some cases, they may be at a earlier phase of planning, but we view that as a part of our mission too.
Okay. Other questions from subcommittee members? Senator Hanger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions, Mr. Chairman. First, Eric, on the rental assistance program, has that evolved to the point that you can provide adequate protection for the landlords? I know you spoke to that in part, but I've known situations where the tenant actually had not experienced adverse economic situations because of COVID, retained their job, but hadn't been paying before we entered into this period, and the moratorium has created problems in dealing with those types of tenants. Is there a way, have you developed a way to protect the interests of the landlord adequately?
Mr. Chair, Senator Hanger, thank you for that question. In terms of those situations, my understanding with we are working closely with both the tenant and landlord associations and trying to make sure that when landlords have questions like that, where I think that the main thing would be if their tenant was not eligible for the assistance. In some cases, we've had tenants who may have had a challenge paying before the pandemic, but if they've had some arrears during the pandemic period and were not able to find a job, and are at the income level, we have unprecedented levels of federal assistance now, so we can help those tenants become eligible and apply, and so that the landlord's made whole. If that tenant is not cooperating, as I understand the budget language with applying, then the protections of the the landlord having to seek that first are there. But in essence, I mean, to your point, that is a legal matter that does get worked out in the courts for the courts to determine if someone is eligible and has both the tenant and landlord have sought assistance. In most cases, we've seen good actors on both sides, but we do hear about cases on both sides where different sides may not be cooperating on the assistance.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, on broadband.
Senator Hanger.
Thank you. Eric, I'm aware, at least there's been at least one project in Southwest with the, which involved Elon Musk's project with the satellite deployment. How is that working out? Do you know, and do we have results on that? And is that economically viable for some parts of the Commonwealth?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hanger, we are evaluating all new technologies. The Commonwealth Connect team, I know Chief Broadband Advisor Evan Feynman and our team under Dr. Holmes' leadership are evaluating new technologies like that. The federal government has awarded some funds to satellite technology now as it's evolved. Currently, with our VADI guidelines, our Virginia Telecommunications Initiative guidelines, we do not count satellite as broadband coverage because of a couple factors. One, some of the latency that exists, and two, really what is provided with that technology is those equipment in the home. So when you pay for and receive the equipment to actually serve an area with satellite, it's for the household that's there now. It's not necessarily there forever, like water or electric would be for as the household changes. So the setup costs are significant, but we're monitoring that closely. We know Wise County and some key partners down there are trying to pilot it, especially with students, which in terms of that one-time need for a family as during the pandemic. But in terms of the long term, making sure that a community is fully covered as people move and households change, and that utility infrastructure is there. It's not currently eligible under our program, but we are monitoring it because the technology keeps evolving. So we certainly are excited to see new ideas like that.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Hanger. Anyone else from the subcommittee?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Barker.
Yes. Eric, thank you for the presentation. The $569 million that's in rent relief is far more than what we spent at the state level in 2020, where I think we're a little over $100 million there. Do you anticipate any problems getting compensation, basically, or reimbursement for the money spent since January 1 by the in terms of the response of U.S. Treasury on that? Were there large numbers that were spent by localities on rent relief programs within their localities that would give us a better picture overall as to what might be continuing forward on some of the rent relief programs?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Barker, you've alluded to several of the key factors there on that question, in that the governor put and the General Assembly had that $62 million that we deployed statewide. Many localities in Northern Virginia, the Richmond region and Hampton Roads, and then the different communities across the Commonwealth did use their CARES allocations that they received, the locality portion. Many of them also use those funds for rent relief. Right. And so you're right that the amount spent in the I would say, and some of them also had community development block grant funds that they used, which had more stringent, like you could only pay for 3 months. You couldn't make the landlord and tenant whole. So in essence, I don't have the figure for you on how much, in addition to the $62 million, was spent Commonwealth-wide. We have some anecdotes on that from, regions where we had the same grantees, where, in Richmond, we may have spent with the state program $5 million, and the local funds may have spent for $10 million. But in the broader question, so yes, it was more of a spend statewide. And I think the important thing to note is that all of those programs and capacity, many of the delivery networks never had that amount of funds even this last year, and now we're getting even more. So the good news is the Commonwealth, because we've led on this issue, we have more capacity than many states. But to be candid with you, it is going to be a challenge. It's a lot of funds that require both the landlord tenant, a two-party providing information. The capacity, though, we have increased with Virginia Housing. They've got over 100 staff and contractors working on the landlord portal. On the tenant side, we have been scaling that up to more over than 100 as well, and we'll continue to try to match the demand and need. But it will be a challenge. Our goal, though, will be to fully obligate and make sure the Commonwealth spends all of those funds. I think many states are going to have been asking already for an extension in time because they don't have even a program yet. So it will be a challenge, and we are happy to continue to update the committee as we turn on those new funds and have the goal of getting to that full obligation. But it will be a challenge. It's going to be a significant amount of resources in a short period of time.
All right, a follow-up question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Questions? Eric, thank you very much. That was very informative, and thanks for the good work that you and your folks have done to get us through this very, very difficult time and help citizens in the Commonwealth who are struggling with the COVID-19 epidemic, and we really appreciate your work. Next up, we have Ellen Marie Hess, Commissioner, Virginia Employment Commission, and she's going to give a summary of the governor's budget proposals for the Virginia Employment Commission. Ellen Marie, are you there?
I am, Senator Marsden.
You have the floor.
And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And before I get into the body of my presentation, which is a very short presentation, I'd like to introduce the VEC staff that are attending this meeting. Jeff Ryan, who is the Chief Deputy Commissioner at VEC, William Walton, he's the Deputy Commissioner for UI, Jason Brown, the Deputy Commissioner for Workforce, Lisa Rowley, VEC's Chief Administrative Law Judge, Tim Kessner, he's our Director of Economic Information and Analytics, Jason Padgett, he's our Director of Policy and Legislation, and Conrad Buckler, our Senior Economist.
Thank you, and welcome all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next slide. So 2020 saw the largest number of claims since the agency began keeping records. By comparison, a week before the onset of the pandemic's impact in Virginia, claims were at a nearly 50-year low. This is important to understand because the agency is counter-cyclically funded. In tough economic conditions, when claims are high, the agency's funding is increased. But during good economic times, our funding is cut. In fact, VEC's budget has been cut by $24.4 million or 40% since 2011. The agency received 1.4 million claims since January 2020, and we've paid on 1.2 million of those claims. Of the remaining 200,000 claims that have not been paid, 20,000 are awaiting hearings. Others are either new claims, they've been held ineligible, or they're fraudulent claims. The 20,000 claims that are awaiting hearing right now are the agency's number one priority. Next slide. Virginia started 2020 with a $1.4 billion balance in the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. We currently have $63.3 million in the trust fund. To date, Virginia has borrowed about $120 million. That was paid off when the CARES Act funds were deposited in the trust fund. The agency expects to borrow intermittently to support the trust fund throughout 2021, depending on the severity and duration of the pandemic. The current estimate for interest on the trust fund borrowing is about $750,000. But again, this is dependent on the impact of the pandemic in Virginia. The technology funding will support changes to the third and final phase of our systems modernization project, which has a go-live date late in 2021. Customer service funding will be dedicated to call centers and claims processing teams and will support ongoing customer service needs through FY 2022. Next slide. We're in discussions with Dr. Healy about when to reinstate the work search. There are about 480,000 openings in the Virginia Workforce Connection, and we've been encouraging claimants to register. We have virtual job fairs scheduled for February and March. There are already 162 businesses and 273 job seekers registered for the February event, with more than a week to go before the event. The agency is expanding our service delivery capability. We've grown our call center in South Boston, taking over stations from DMV, and we're very grateful that Commissioner Holcomb gave up those seats. We're moving into a larger call center in Van Sant. We are continuing to recruit hearing officers and adjudicators in Richmond and Hampton. Finally, we're waiting on what actions Congress will take on the President Biden's proposals, and we are implementing the proposals that came out of the last administration. That's the presentation, Chairman Marsden. I can take questions.
Thank you so much. Questions from the subcommittee? Just one question that I have. I'm just curious. I know you've been bombarded with delegates and senators calling for, for certain individual cases and what have you. What was the volume on that? Do you have any idea? And has it slacked off some since you've been able to make adjustments?
Well, I know that we were receiving hundreds of thousands of calls, emails, not just from your offices, Chairman Marsden, but also, from the public and from, other venues. But, they have slacked off a little bit, but the benefits ran out at the end of December, and we are implementing the new benefits that were just enacted at the end of December. And so we have seen a little uptick as folks are waiting for the new benefits to come.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the subcommittee?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hanger.
Just kind of an observation, I guess, and I'm not sure we can do anything about it, but some people are in dire straits. I had a call this past weekend from a fellow who got behind on his child support enforcement and still hadn't received his unemployment compensation. So now he's been called back to work, but he can't go because they're sending him to jail for not paying his child support. So it's kind of a tough circular kind of dynamic.
Yeah, Senator Hanger, I thought that mostly we were handling child support through civil actions and deducting things from people's paycheck.
He doesn't have a paycheck, so
yeah, it is. I'm wondering how many people are going to jail versus the civil process that's been put in place over the years.
He may be put out, but not actually incarcerated. But that's where he thought he was headed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Thank you. Jason, Charles, anything else for the good of the subcommittee that you'd like to report? Mary Ellen Marie, thank you very, very much for your presentation and for all the hard work that you folks at the Virginia Employment Commission have been through. I know it's been daunting and difficult, and we hope to come out of this all stronger and better organized and better funded and to deal with anything that happens like this in the future. So thank you. Charles, Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Charles?
Mr. Chairman, this is
Yes.
Charles. I'll just say that next week, the plan is for staff to give an overview of the budget amendment requests, and that will conclude our subcommittee meetings for the session.
Thank you so much. Jason, anything for you?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will all see you at 9 o'clock at the full committee.
Thank you all so much. With that, if there's nothing else, the committee will rise.